Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Chulin daf Nun. We are going to begin on Nun Amud Aleph, about 10 lines from the top. Tanya. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, B'nei Moyin Shenikvu V'lecha Seismosan Kshera. So we mentioned that even if there's a hole, sometimes if there is a proper sealant, which could include chalev fats, as we said, the kosher fats are a stronger sealant, and that certainly can hold a hole so that's clogged, and therefore it could still be kosher. A non-kosher fat, as we saw, is actually a machlokas. We ended up saying, according to Rav Sheshes, he says echad zeh v'echad zeh soisam. But again, it's the question whether or not it actually is a proper sealant. We also spent some time discussing what exactly is considered to be a non-kosher fat, whether it's something in which has a membrane, something in which can easily be peeled, so therefore again it's not really very strong, and possibly also taisiv, that it's kind of like, as Rashi says, a simlasai. It's some type of like garment. It's just like flaps over, but it's not something which is really like a strong adhesive. Anyway, so when it comes to the stomach, if there's a hole, so its liquid could be this sealant. It could cover it up. So my lecha, what does this mean? So Rav Kahana shir kadamayu, the nafik agav duchka. So it's referring to this mucus that comes out due to some form of pressure. So that's what that's referring to. And let's just look over here. I think there's just one picture, or maybe a couple of them. So there's a picture of this. It says, cut open to show the mucus-like inner lining. The scalpel has scraped away some of the materials. This is really going to be the only picture I'm going to be showing, I believe, for today, of what we're discussing. So it's something which you would not necessarily have thought that this is what it's referring to. But again, this is a picture of the mucus that does clog or close up a hole, and therefore that would actually be, according to this, a proper sealant to make it kosher. Okay. Gemiri Chavid Rabbi. So it was learned Rabbi Abu Umanhu Reb Zera. Jermo Samson was Chavid Reb Zera. The colleagues of Reb Zera, Reb Zera Umanhu Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Abba, Bered Rabbi Chia Barabba, Hachi Omer Rabbi Chia Barabba, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Halacha Karev Shem Gamliel, Betreifa. The halacha is like Hashem Gamliel when it comes to the din of treifus. The halacha Karev Shimon Ba'avel. So also we're going to start talking about avelus over here. Okay, the laws of mourning. So halacha Hashem Gamliel Betreifa Hadamar. So what did Rav Shem Gamliel say? He just talked it. He just said it. That when it comes to the Bnei Mayin, when it comes to the stomach, if there's this mucus that clogs up the hole, that's saisim and that'll be kosher. So, okay, but who's Rav Shimon? Rav Shimon Ba'avel Ma, he did not. So we learned, of course, in Moed Katan, Kol Shloishim Harishainim, the first 3 days, Bama Makam Karav Moinei Mahen. If you're coming from a close place, then you can be counted among them, says Rashi. Kol Shloishim Harishainim Shel Avelos. The first 3 days, Bama Makam Karav, if you're coming from a close place, says Rashi. Imlo Haya Echad Lekaman. Im lo hoya echad min havelim bebayis. If one of the mourners was not in the house, he was close by, but taich mahalach yom echad, which is like within a 1 day walk, v'roihu ladas bo b'yoyim, he could have known that day, alva b'shol yada, even though he didn't know that person died, chal velos alav, so the velos falls upon him. He has to come within the first 3 days. Therefore, he could already start counting from the day before because he was close by than all the other people who were mourning. So as long as you get there within the first 3 days, as long as you were also close by, then you it counts for you. That's what it means. If you come from a far place, so more than a 1 day distance, then you have to count yourself. So whenever you here is when you would start the Avelis process. However, after those 3 days, you always will have to start your own count. You'll only be able to tag on to the other mourners only in a situation where it was in the first 3 days and it was Malkim Karev. Okay. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel no. Feel b'yom hashvi, even on the last day. The fact that you were close by, you can count, and therefore apparently that means the halacha is like him. Amar man dehavi izchi v'asik, someone who is, let's say, traveling to Eretz Yisrael, v'agam l'shmaisa, who's going to be zoicha to go there and to teach over this sugya mepul midamara from his mouth. So people should know that this is the halacha. And of course, it's interesting that they have to go mamakim rachaik to tell this din. So is the halacha like Rav Shimon Gamliel when it comes to treifas by the bnei mayim, that the mucus will be considered as a proper seal? And ain't halacha. No, halacha is not like him. How about when it comes to the din of Avelos? If you come even on the last day, Mamakim Karov, that you can be counted with them. So Malay, Pluk the nin who it's a machokas. Titmar Rav Chisda Imer halacha. V'chein Rav Yochanan halacha. Rav Nachman Imer in halacha. Vein halacha Rav Shimon Gamliel b'treifa. However, halacha Rav Shimon b'avel. Why? Why do we split the difference? Because the Amr Shmuel halacha could be hamekel b'avel. When it comes to dinim avelos, the general rule is we go lenient, and therefore in this situation we're going to go mekel, and even on the 7th day he could be counted there, and that would be fine. Okay. Omer Rav Shimi Barchia Makifin Bivnei Moyim. So Makifin is an interesting idea that we'll do is we'll compare one hole to a new hole that we'll create, usually next to it, to determine if the first hole came before Shechita, and therefore obviously be a treifa because it can't have a hole in there, or is after Shechita, and therefore you'll be able to see, because you're making this new hole after Shechita, so therefore you'll be able to determine whether this hole happened before or afterwards. Rashi explains this as well. Im nimsu nekuvim ve'enanu yodim in kodem shchita v'achar shchita noikvin nekev achar b'tzida. We make another hole by its side, and we determine im marin shavin. So we determine if it looks the same, it's kosher. To be a do it l'achar shchita then that's what we'll basically do. That's what makifin is. Okay. So the din is we will be makifim b'nei mayim, and we'll do that to be able to determine whether or not the hole came before or after the shechita. So hanu b'nei mayim. So there was this case where we had this innards. You also come into the Rabbi, because apparently there's a hole in it, and they didn't know when it came before. Obviously, if you knew the hole was before shechita, it's treifa. But for whatever reason, there's a suffix. So Akfinhu, so they actually made another hole next to it, V'lo idmu, and it didn't look the same. And therefore, since it didn't look the same, we could think, well, it must be that it's not good. So also, Ramesharshia Beret and Mamashmish Ba, so what he was doing was Mamashmish, he started rubbing it with his fingers and touching it, the Adam, and all of a sudden it started looking the same. Says Rashi, by him just doing this rubbing, a little bit of motion to that area, it was able to be the similar color, and therefore it demonstrated that it really came afterwards. So how did you know to do this form of wisdom of rubbing it and then recognizing its true status? So it's not really such great chachma. Just how many people do you think this already exchanged hands with? There's so many other people that already looked at this, and they were touching it and touching it and touching it. So therefore, I figured I might as well do the same thing with this new hole, and then by doing that, it ended up being the same. Amalei chacham bari betrefus kirav Yochanan. Someone should, you're a chacham in treifus, just like the status of Rav Yochanan, which obviously was quite a compliment. Rav Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer, Demar Tavayu, Makif and Bereya. They both say that you could do the same thing when it comes to a lung. If there's a hole in the lung, you don't know if the lung had the hole before or afterwards, so you can rub it. Okay, so that is the question. So, and this is going to be question TB21 in a second, whether we're Makif and Bereya. So it sounds like the answer is going to be yes, but it's not going to be so posh. We're going to get to that. So let's keep on moving. So Omer Rav Lo Amran El Ba'isa Ruga. The only time you could do that is if it's in the same side of the lung. Let's say it that way. Of a Maruga Ruga Loy. But let's say from the right side to the left side, no. It's got to be right next to it. Hilchasa, Gafil Maruga Ruga. No. You can compare them even if they're in the same lung, same side, says Rashi. Daifin Hareya Yamini O Smoily. Okay? So it doesn't matter if it's the right side, there's a hole in the right side, you can put a hole in the left one. It doesn't have to be on the same side. However, we get a little bit more into it. Medakla daka megasa legasa. It has to be big to big and small to small. Of a low megasa ledaka, a low medaka legasa. This actually it's taka kadai, just to show the lung. We might as well. As I said, we don't have a lot of pictures today, so let's look at the lung as we can see over here. So as we know that the lung has numerous umois and unois. It has 5 small lobes on the top and 2 small on the bottom. So what it's saying is if there would be a lobe, which has a hole in it, let's say on the bottom, one of the big ones, so then you cannot put a hole on the top ones because that will not necessarily determine the same thing because they're not the same size. So an uma to an una to an uma, we will not say that is enough of a determination to be makifin. Okay, so that is another important detail. Medaka, so it has to be medaka ladaka, megasa legasa, of a lo megasa ladaka, of a lo medaka legasa. Okay. Okay, let's go slow. And Rashi adds something else over here which is worthwhile pointing out. He says, afil behemacheres. You could do this even with a different animal. It means from one uma to another. Maybe not from one to another one. So it's a little bit not so clear what exactly this means. Does it mean it has to be on that same una? Doesn't sound like that necessarily from the reading of the Gemara. So let's see what I wrote over here for question TB21. Im Hareya Chulin. I have no idea what I wrote. So we said afilu mi aruga la aruga. Let's just write this down. Right? Aruga la aruga. Right? Which was right to the left side. Is, I would say, boykin. Of a low daka legasa, which, as we said, is not the uma la ona l'hefech. It has to be the top ones or the bottom ones. And I'm also going to write Ayin Rashi. Okay, so that is TB21. I'm way off on that question, even come close to answering that question. Okay, so when it comes to the windpipe, if there's a hole there, you could also be makifin there as well. So what is the din about a hole? To remind us, Rashi says, Im nimsas psuka la'achar zman ikadur ki iser. If, let's say, you have a hole with the size of an Isser coin, that is a hole. So you do another hole to determine whether or not it was there before or after Shechita. Now, if the kana could have been cut, that part could have been cut during the Shechita. The only way to allow it is if it's within that chulia, which is the those band of rings. There's like 3 of them. Rashi is chulia shalosh tabois. there's 3 tabois which are next to one another, so it's got to be within the proximity of the hole. Even from one ring to the other. And but it has to be from the thick side to the thick side, or the thin side to the thin one. Okay, so again, the kana is shaped that some of it is thick and some of it's thin, so the whole has to be on the same thickness for it to be, as Rashi says, the same thickness will not work. Okay, so that's the din when it comes to the kana. Okay, fine. Omer Ziri Chilchulas Shenikva, the rectum which has a hole in it, Kshera, Hoyel Virichayim Amidoisaisa, because the thighs will hold it together. Now this is going to be the only paragraph I'm going to read over here. So it says the rectum is a bovine is a relatively long tube that extends from the large intestine to the anus, to the piatabas, at the rear of the body. When it reaches the thigh area above its hind legs, it is tightly enclosed by the surrounding bone, the spinal vertebrae and the large hip bone, as well as by the muscles of the area. Within the encasement, a portion of the rectum may be missing without affecting its function, for the solid waste will continue through the rectum rather than leak into the abdominal cavity. Okay, so they're part of where the area where there is some type of damage, some hole. It won't be a problem if it's the area where the thighs hold it together. The kama Rabbi Yochanan b'makam hadevek berubo. If it's the place where it's the enclosed and strong area, so then it could hold it together up to the majority. However, if it's a place in which it's not the area which is holding together, so therefore even the smallest hole will make it a problem. Did I not tell you, do not literally hang upon it, as we continue doing Amid Bays. Buki Sariki, says Rashi, Kadim Rakim, Kaloim Devarim She'enan. Don't hold on to things which are not true. Hachi Amr Nachman, Makam Hadavak, when it comes to the place which is tight, feel need to kulo kosher, even if the thing's completely gone, it's still kosher because it doesn't make it a treifa. The animal still is able to produce, to let its waste go. However, it has to be at least the amount of a tfisa. But what is that? So Rabbi Kamali batda betura, like the width of a finger for an ox. Rashi's bat is an etzba. Okay, so even a small little amount that's still there is enough. Hakeres hapanimi. So then we talked about the inner stomach. Omer Rav Yehuda Omer Rav Eir Nosen Barshila Reish Tabche de Tzipoiri, and he was a top butcher with Ne Rabbi, and testified Misham Rabbi Nosan Ezu Hi Keres hapanimi. Where is this inner panimi? So Sanya Divi. This is considered to be the Sanya Divi. Actually, we do have another statement over here. So let's see where that. Let me just see this. The Sanya Divi literally means, the acronym in Aramaic means hated by the wolves. Is a deep sac that attaches to the digestive tract where the small intestine meets the colon. So where the small intestine meets the colon, this is what's called the Sanya Divi. Although today it's considered part of the large intestine, in Talmudic times, the kasum, which is Caecum, was generally labeled a stomach. It is a blind sac, as it says here, with only one opening through which digested material must both enter and leave. While the above interpretation is referred by Rashi, he quotes another view as well, which identifies the Sanya Divi as a section of the rumen, which is another one of the stomachs. Specifically, there's the location where the butchers cut open the rumen in order to remove decaying foodstuffs. Well, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where that is. Fine. So that is another interpretation of this part. So let's just understand the calcum, which is again hated by the wolves, is this deep sac that attaches to the digestive tract, which connects the small intestine and the colon. Okay, so at least that's how he interprets this. And again, you have to be an expert butcher to know all of these details. Rabbi Shmuel Omer is tumcha de karsa. So now we have different interpretations. So I mean, Rashi himself doesn't know what it is. Doesn't mean he couldn't have been necessarily an expert butcher, that he knew every little piece of every single animal. Okay. Rab Asi Rav Yochanan Makam Sar Yesh B'Keres was this narrow part of the stomach. I'm not sure where it is. Rab Nachman Yitzchak Nafal Karsa Babira. Nafal Karsa Babira. Let me just see if there's. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not missing another explanation over here. Says Rashi Hoyel ve'eni Yodea Heichen Hu. Since we don't really know where this is, basically, we have to basically toss it, right? Rav Achabar, Rav Avol, Rav Asi, min hametzar lomata. It's from the narrow, where the part narrows down and downward. Says Rashi, Mamakam shakeres hoylech hametzar, the place where the stomach narrows down, Latzad haveshet, hukari panimi. Okay, that's called the inner part. All right. Rabbi Yaakov bar Nachmani Omer Shmuel Makam She'ein Bo Milas. It's a place which does not have, has no hairs. Says Rashi, Chelk She'ein Sham Oisot Semer Shigarin Boroitzchim in a Karas. So that's what that means, and actually we do have another explanation, so we might as well get it. The area that does not have wool-like papillae. The inside surface of the rumen is aligned with short hair-like like hairs. Their function is to absorb any nutrients produced by decaying foodstuffs. In the section of the rumen located toward the rear of the animal, the inner surface is covered with a thick concentration of papillae, which resembles wool. That's what mielis is, right? It looks like wool. So it's the part which does not, part of the stomach which does not have this hairs. Okay, right? So it's part of the stomach that doesn't have it. That's what it's referring to. Okay. Avino Aimer Geniva Mishmei Rav Tefach Beveshet Samach Keres. This is a tefach of the throat next to the stomach. Zuhi Keres Hapanimi. Hapanimus. Amr Ramish made Rav Asi Bar Chanina Kol Keres Kuloi Zuhi Keres Hapanimus. Actually, it says no, the entire stomach is considered to be the Keres Hapanimi, which I guess is an interesting opinion, but that's what he says. The Ezu Keres Hachitzon, so then what's the outer part? Basar Hachayfas Royev Hakeres. It's the flesh that covers the majority of the stomach. Rabba Bar Rav Huna Aimer Mefarasa. It's referring to the Mefarasa. Okay, Ma Mefarasa. What is that part of the animal that sees the bottom? Amrababi Heicha Depari Tavchi. It's the place where the butchers uncovers first. Notice when the animal's hung by its hind legs, that part. Ben Abdi Kiraba, Bar Rav Huna, he held like him. Amul Ravashi, Ilamemer Kol Hani Shmaisalamai. What do we do? So Malay Kulu Shaykhin Bidaraba Bar Rav Huna. All of them are pretty similar to this place of the Mafarasa, again, where the butcher uncovers the animal first, where its hind legs are upward, so it's upside down. Rav Asi and Rav Yochanan Mai, or Lake, Far Pirshu is already explained by Rav Barava, Rabavina, Udav Rabbi Maraba Mai, so Merlay, Hanivani Pligi. So they definitely argue. Okay, so this is a little bit bumpy. Let's look at question 8. A Keres Panimi, if there's a small hole, even in the Keres Panimi, it's a problem. So what is the? So he says, Maho Keres Panimi lefi hashita hamachmira b'yoser. So which is the most strict of all the opinions? So Rashi says, this is, we have to look at this Rashi down the bottom, Hilchas Avdin l'chumra, v'tarfinin b'chol hakeres. benekef b'mashu k'bnei Morava. So the people in Eretz Yisrael, they said, the Amri b'Morava, right? They said that the entire stomach is considered to be the keres hapanimi, which means that if you have a small hole at any part, then it's a treifa. Miu, says Rashi, kol hanach treifas anan lo tarchinan lo midchi basrayu the kol kama deloi mishtachan azlina basaruba. So it's important that we mentioned before that we're not just going to tear apart the entire keres and look at every single inch to make sure there's not a hole. We're just going to go basaroiv outside of the lungs, as we saw in that famous Rashi by the Yudches Trevis. However, when it comes to this, we're not going to be so strict. But technically speaking, it is true that we are strict. We would say it's the entire stomach is a problem. So this is question 8. Who keres hapanimi? But it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be ripping the whole thing apart. But nonetheless, that is the answer to that question. Okay, let's keep on moving. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'Gedoyla Hu. So Omer ben Yamin bar Yefes. Omer b'Lezer lo gedol gedol mamish lo katana katana mamish. When he says big, it doesn't mean mamish the biggest, and small doesn't mean the smallest. It means like this: Kol shenikra ba tefach. Let's say there's a hole which is the size of a tefach. V'lo haviruba. Even though it doesn't constitute the majority, we still say zuhi shishnid b'gedola tefach. The fact is that as long as it's a tefach, it's a treifa. And the other way around, ruba v'lo havi tefach. Let's say it does cover the majority ripped, even though that tear is not a tefach, but since it's the majority, zu shishninu pikatani beruba. So therefore, we go chumrah on both sides. This is TA 18. Keres achitzaina. So we were talking about the keres hapanimi is even a mashahu, right? So the keres panimi, right? We say a hole which is a mashahu. However, when it comes to the keres hachitzaina, so here we see differently. Right? B'kama havi treifa, so it's either rove or a tefach, right? Or a rove or a tefach, and that's a chumrah. So it's l'chumrah, namely, even less than a tefach, right? Even less than a tefach, if it's rove, then it's treif. Okay. All right. Let's finish up this stuff. Ruba v'lo havi tefach shita. I don't understand if it's the majority. Of course, it's the treif. L'tzricha de havi tefach b'mashu. Ma'udatema ad mikra ba tefach. Until if it's a tefach, lo havi tarfa, it should be a treif for kamash mulan. No, because if it's the tiniest little amount, maybe that's not enough. No, it doesn't matter. Once it's robe, that's it. Omer Geniva Omer Rabasi. Niktara Kasela Treifel. Let's say it has the hole, which is the width of a sela coin. It's a treifa. Shim timtach talmoid al tefach. Because if you stretch the hole, it could get into the size of a tefach. And therefore, that's the reason by the keres hachitzayna, we say that if it's a tefach, that's enough to make it not good. So even if it's the width. He explained to me that I'm varad in Arda, on the bridge on Narda. Why did he explain to on a bridge? But that's how he remembers it. Kasel ksheri, kasel treifa. If it's the size of a sela, it's still okay, but it's more than not. This is again the keres hachitzayna. The kami yeser miketsel. Rav Yosef going the alon tlas kashiasa b'tzifa b'doichka. If you have 3 date pits, and you can put them in with force, or blut sipav, let's say it doesn't have any meat on it, but ravcha has no flesh on the pits, and it can go in with ease. So that is the distinction. But again, we see this important din, like we have no idea what is even the keres hapanimi, right? So therefore, all these different shitas, so we end up going l'chumra and saying we just assume the entire keres is the keres hapanimi, and therefore the keres hapanimi is considered to be b'mashahu, and therefore we said, so what is taka the keres hachitzayna, that's either rov or a tefach? So that's what the Ben Rava says is basar hachifes rov hakeres. So in that situation, the flesh that covers the majority is considered to be we'll make it a tray 5 cup.